Hello, you're watching France 24. We're going to take you straight to the UN General Assembly in New York, where the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has just taken the podium.
Of its people. Under my administration, Brazil has been working to regain world trust and also to lower unemployment, violence, and business risks by reducing bureaucracy through deregulation and especially by leading through example. My country was very close to socialism, which led us to a situation of widespread corruption, serious economic recession, high crime rates, and continuous, ceaseless attacks against family and religious values that are part and parcel of our traditions. In 2013, an agreement between the former Workers' Party and the Cuban dictatorship brought to Brazil 10,000 doctors who had no evidence of professional training. They were prevented from bringing their spouses or children, and 75% of their wages were confiscated by the Cuban regime, and they were further prevented from enjoying fundamental rights such as, for example, the right to go and come. Truly tantamount to slave labor, believe me, supported by human rights organizations, both in Brazil and the United Nations organization. Even before I took office, almost 90% of these Cuban citizens left Brazil as a result of a one-sided initiative by the Cuban government. Those who decided to stay in Brazil will undergo proper technical eligibility criteria to allow them to exercise the medical profession. Brazil has therefore stopped contributing to the Cuban dictatorship by no longer sending to Havana $300 million, as had been the case every year. History has taught us that already back in the 1960s, Cuban agents were sent out to several countries to collaborate towards implementing dictatorships in the region. A few decades ago, they tried to change the Brazilian regime and the system in place in other countries in Latin America. They were defeated. Brazilian civilians and military died, were killed, and so many had their reputation fully destroyed. We have nevertheless overcome that war, and we have upheld our freedom. In Venezuela, these agents of the Cuban regime, introduced by Hugo Chavez, also made their way into Venezuela. And today, there are 60,000 Cuban agents who control and interfere in all areas of the Venezuelan society, especially in intelligence and defense. Venezuela, formerly a vibrant democratic country, currently experiences the cruelty of socialism. It is fair to say that, yes, socialism is working in Venezuela. They're all poor and deprived of freedom. Brazil has also felt the impacts resulting from the Venezuelan dictatorship. Of the more than 4 million Venezuelan citizens who fled the country, a sizable portion migrated to Brazil, fleeing hunger and violence. We have done our part to help them and assist them through the Operation Welcome, carried out by the Brazilian Army and praised worldwide. We have also worked with other countries, including the United States of America, to ensure that democracy will be established in Venezuela. We have also endeavored our very best efforts to ensure that other South American countries will not experience this harmful regime. The Sao Paulo Forum, a criminal organization created back in 1990 by Fidel Castro, Lula da Silva, and Hugo Chavez to disseminate and implement socialism in Latin America, remains alive and must be combated. Ladies and gentlemen, in the quest for prosperity, we have been putting in place policies that will bring us closer to other countries that have achieved development and consolidated their democracies. There can be no political freedom without economic freedom, and vice versa. A free market, concessions projects, and privatization opportunities are already a visible part of today's Brazil. The Brazilian economy is now responding as the distortions and chains of nearly 2 decades have been overcome. More than 2 decades of fiscal irresponsibility, manipulation, ideological manipulation of the state apparatus and widespread corruption. Economic openness, capable government management and productivity gains are immediate goals of our administration. We are opening up the economy and we are integrating ourselves into the global value chains. In no more than 8 months, we have successfully completed the 2 most important and largest trade agreements in the history of my country. I'm talking about the recently signed agreements between the Mercosur bloc of countries in the European Union and also between Mercosur and the European Free Trade Area, the EFTA. We intend to go ahead and enter into more such agreements in the next few months. We also stand ready to start out our process of accession to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. We're well underway in that effort and have adopted the world's highest standards and best practices in all areas, ranging from financial regulation all the way up to environmental protection. Madam Indigenous representative and leader Izani Kalapalo, an indigenous spokesperson, is here, and we will now speak about the Amazon in particular. First of all, may I say that my administration has solemnly committed itself to environmental preservation and to sustainable development, to the benefit of Brazil and of the world at large. Brazil is one of the world's richest countries in biodiversity and mineral resources. Our Amazonian region is larger than all of Western Europe and remains virtually pristine and untouched, which is evidence of the fact that we are one of the countries that most protect the environment. During this season of the year, the dry weather and winds are conducive and favor spontaneous forest fires and also criminal burnings. It should be highlighted that there are forest fires or burnings that are part of the ordinary practices of indigenous peoples and the local populations as part of their own culture and means of livelihood. We all know that all countries have problems. Yet, the sensationalist attacks that we have suffered, coming from a large part of the international media due to the fire outbreaks in the Amazonian region, have aroused our patriotic sentiment. It is a fallacy to say that the Amazon is the heritage of humankind, and a misconception as confirmed by scientists to say that our Amazonian forests are the lungs of the world. Using and resorting to these fallacies, certain countries, instead of helping, embarked on the media lies and behaved in a disrespectful manner and with a colonialist spirit. They even called into question that which we hold as the most sacred value, our sovereignty. One of these countries during a recent G7 meeting dared suggest applying sanctions to Brazil without even consulting with or hearing Brazil. I thank those countries that did not accept to go ahead with this absurd proposal. In particular, I thank President Donald Trump, who very aptly summarized the spirit that should prevail among United Nations member countries, i.e. respect for the freedom and the sovereignty of each of us as nations. Currently, 14% of the Brazilian territory are demarcated officially as indigenous lands, but one must understand that our natives are human beings, just as any one of us here. They want and they deserve to enjoy the same rights as all of us. I want to make it plain and clear, Brazil will not increase to 20% her area already demarcated officially as indigenous lands, as some heads of state would like to see. In Brazil, there are 225 different indigenous peoples, in addition to about 70 tribes living in isolated locations nationwide. Each indigenous people or tribe has their own chief, their own culture, their own traditions and customs, and above all, they have their own way of seeing the world. The view of one indigenous leader does not represent the views of all Brazilian indigenous peoples. Oftentimes, some of these leaders, such as tribal chief Raoni, have been used as maneuvering tools manipulated by government or foreign governments in their information war to advance their interests in the Amazon. Unfortunately, some people, both in and outside of Brazil, supported by NGOs, have stubbornly insisted on treating and keeping our Indians as if they were real cavemen. Brazil now has a president that is concerned with those who were there in our territory before the Portuguese arrived back in the 1500s. The indigenous people do not want to be poor, large landholders sitting on rich lands. They do not, especially sitting on the world's richest lands. That is precisely the case of the Yanomami Reserve and the Raposa Serra do Sol Reserve. These reserves are home to vast deposits of gold, diamond, uranium, niobium, and rare earths, among other resources. And these territories are huge. The Yanomami Reserve alone numbers approximately 95,000 square kilometers, an area equivalent to the size of Portugal or of Hungary, although only 15,000 indigenous people live in such a vast area. This goes to show clearly that those who attack us are not at all concerned about indigenous as human beings, but rather they're concerned more about the mineral riches and the biodiversity that exists in these areas. As evidence to you of the fact that there is no single authority among the indigenous peoples, I wish to read out to you a letter drafted and representing a substantial part of the indigenous communities in Brazil, addressed to you, the United Nations Assembly. Open letter to the indigenous peoples of Brazil. The group of indigenous farmers of Brazil, made up by several different ethnic groups and found in all states of the Brazilian Federation and inhabiting an area of more than 30 million hectares of the Brazilian territory, hereby respectfully addresses the Brazilian society to express its total and unconditional support to indigenous spokesperson and representative Isani Calapo, who is here with us from the Xingu Indigenous Park, Mato Grosso State, so that she may attend the UN Assembly, the UN General Assembly in New York in the US, and there voice and explain the reality experienced by the indigenous peoples in Brazil, and also bring to the fore the current situation of lies disseminated and propagated by the international and national media. They have insisted on turning Brazil's indigenous peoples into an endless market reserve, serving the interests of foreign countries that still view Brazil as a colony without rules or without sovereignty. 14% of Brazil's national territory are duly and regularly established as official indigenous lands. Many such communities are thirsty and eager and hope that the development of this portion of the country will finally take place without ideological chains, which will in turn enable achievement of a higher quality of life and standard of living in fields such as entrepreneurship, healthcare, and education. A new policy is needed for indigenous peoples in Brazil, and time is of the essence here. Bold measures can and should be encouraged in the pursuit of autonomy, economic empowerment of the indigenous peoples. Quite certainly, if a series of decisions are taken to that effect, we will be able to envisage a new approach to the Brazilian indigenous agenda. A new period of time, a new chapter of hope is needed currently for the indigenous communities. The situation of extreme poverty in which they find themselves, surviving on nothing but a family stipend and basic baskets of foodstuffs, has never delivered dignity or development. Radical extreme environmentalism and outdated approaches to the cause of indigenous people that are out of sync with what indigenous peoples truly want are tantamount to backwardness, marginalization, and absolute lack of citizenship. The reality described here requires that the world leaders attending the UN General Assembly learn and become familiar with our wishes and aspirations through the voice of indigenous spokesperson Izani Kalapo, who will convey to you all the real situation regarding the Brazilian indigenous communities and the environment. Spokesperson Izani Kalapo therefore enjoys the trust and prestige of the indigenous leaders that are interested in further development and empowerment in a higher profile role and voice, and is thus fully in a position to represent the 52 ethnic groups listed in the attachment hereto. The monopoly of Tribal Chief Raoni is over. The United Nations Organization performed a key role in overcoming colonialism in the past and cannot possibly accept that this type of mindset be allowed to come back to its rooms and halls, no matter under what pretext. We cannot forget that the world needs to be fed. France and Germany, for example, use up more than 50% of their territories for agriculture. By contrast, Brazil uses no more than 8% of its lands for food production. 61% of our territory are preserved. Ours is a zero-tolerance policy towards crime, including environmental crimes. I wish to again affirm my stance in this regard. Any initiative to help or support preservation of the Amazon forest or other biomes must be treated in full respect for Brazilian sovereignty. We also reject the attempts to exploit and use the environmental agenda or the indigenous policy agenda as tools to further political, economic interests of foreign countries, especially those that are disguised as good intentions. We stand ready to work together in partnerships and by adding value to our resources so as to sustainably develop all of our potentialities. Brazil hereby reaffirms her uncompromising, unmistakable commitment to the highest standards of human rights, to advocating democracy and freedom, to include freedom of expression, religious freedom, and freedom of the press. A commitment that goes hand in hand with our efforts to fight corruption and crime, which our society urgently calls for. We will continue to contribute, both within and outside of the United Nations framework, to build a world where there is no impunity, there is no hideout or shelter to criminals and corrupt people. Under my administration, Italian terrorist Cesare Battisti fled Brazil, was later arrested in Bolivia and then extradited to Italy. 3 other terrorists from Paraguay and 1 from Chile, who used to live in Brazil up until recently as political refugees, have also been returned to their countries of origin. Terrorists operating under the guise of politically persecuted individuals will no longer find refuge in Brazil. Not too long ago, socialist presidents who preceded me in Brazil embezzled and misused hundreds of billions of dollars to buy a part of the media and of the Brazilian parliament, all in the name of an absolute power agenda. They have been tried and punished thanks to the sense of patriotism, perseverance, and courage of a judge who has become a symbol of my country. I'm talking about Dr. Sergio Moro, our incumbent Minister of Justice and Public Safety. Those presidents who came before me also transferred a sizable amount of these funds to third-party countries with the purpose of fostering and putting in place similar power projects throughout the region. Now, that source of funds has now dried out. Those same top-ranking government officials used or would come here to the UN year after year and make disengaged speeches about topics that never, ever served Brazil's real interests, nor did they ever contribute to foster greater world stability. Still, They were all applauded. In my country, we had no choice but do something about the virtually 70,000 murders and countless violent crimes that used to massacre the Brazilian population every year. Life, after all, is the most basic of human rights. Our military police officers were the preferred target of crime up until recently. In 2017 alone, about 400 military police officers were cruelly murdered. However, that is changing now. Measures have been taken, and we have succeeded in lowering by more than 20% the number of murders in the first 6 months of my administration. Drug seizures, including cocaine and other drugs, have reached record levels so far. Today, Brazil is a safer country and an even more hospitable country. We have just extended visa waiver to countries such as the United States, Japan, Australia, and Canada. And we're currently considering adopting similar measures to China and India, among other countries. With more safety and with these easier, streamlined procedures, we want to ensure that everyone can visit and get to know Brazil, especially the Brazilian Amazonian region, in all of its vastness and natural beauty. The Amazon is not being devastated, nor is it being consumed by fire, as the media misleadingly says. Each of you, ladies and gentlemen, can bear witness to what I'm saying now. And you can do so on a first-hand basis. Make sure you do visit Brazil and get to know Brazil. It is a very different country vis-à-vis the country that has been portrayed in many newspapers and television channels. Religious persecution is a scourge we should all tirelessly fight. In the past few years, we have witnessed in different regions of the world cowardly attacks that have victimized followers and faithful gathering in churches, synagogues, and mosques. Brazil strongly condemns all of these acts and remains ready to collaborate together with other countries to protect those who are oppressed because of their faith. The Brazilian people is particularly concerned about the increasing persecution, discrimination, and violence against missionaries and religious minorities, as has been seen in different geographies of the world. We therefore support establishing the International Day in memory of victims of acts of violence as a result of creed, religion, and related values. On that date, we will yearly celebrate those who suffer the harmful consequences of religious persecution. It is not acceptable at all that in the 21st century, with so many tools, instruments, treaties, organizations aimed at ultimately enshrining all types of rights, it is not acceptable that today we see millions of Christians and people of other religions who have ultimately lost their lives or freedom because of their faith. Evidence of Brazil's devotion to the peace cause is found in the solid history of Brazil's contributions to United Nations missions. For 70 years now, Brazil has given actual, effective contributions to the United Nations peacekeeping operations. And we support all ongoing efforts to ensure that these missions become more effective and ultimately bring about real, concrete benefits to the countries receiving them. Under extremely diverse situations in countries such as Haiti, the Lebanon, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Brazilian troops have been recognized for the high quality of their work and for their respect towards the population, respect for human rights, and the guiding principles in peacekeeping operations. May I again reaffirm our willingness to uphold our concrete contributions to the United Nations missions, including in areas such as skills development and professional training of troops, an area in which Brazil is widely recognized for her experience. In the course of this year, 2019, we have established a broad-ranging international agenda with a view to restoring Brazil's role in the world scene and resuming relations with important partners. Last January, we were in Davos for the World Economic Forum, where we presented our ambitious reforms program to the investors community from all over the world. In March, we visited Washington, D.C., where we launched a comprehensive and bold partnership with the U.S. government, the government of the United States in all areas, with an emphasis on political coordination and economic and military cooperation. Political coordination and economic and military cooperation. Still, in the month of March, we went to Chile, where the Pro-South initiative was launched, an important step to ensure South America will consolidate itself as a region of democracy and freedom. After that, we visited Israel, where we identified countless opportunities for cooperation, particularly in the field of technology and security. I thank Israel for the support received to fight recent disasters in my country. We also visited one of our major partners in the South American Southern Cone, Argentina. Together with Argentine President Mauricio Macri and our partners from Uruguay and Paraguay, we have done away with ideology in the Mercosur bloc of countries, and we have achieved important trade gains by successfully completing negotiations that had been dragging on for decades. Before the end of the year, we will be visiting important Asian partners, not only in the Far East, but also in the Middle East. These visits will further strengthen the friendship ties and deepen our relations with Japan, China, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. We do intend to follow the same pathway and approach towards all of the Arab world and Asia. We are also keenly looking forward to visiting our partners in Africa, partners and friends in Africa, Oceania, and Europe. As you can see, Brazil is a country that is open to the world and seeking partnerships with all of those who are interested in working for prosperity, for peace, and for freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, the Brazil I represent here is a country that is lifting itself up again, reinvigorating partnerships and regaining its political and economic confidence. We are ready and poised to take on the responsibilities that are incumbent upon us in the international system. Over the past few decades, without realizing, we allowed ourselves to be seduced by ideological thought systems that did not seek truth, but rather absolute power. Ideology made its way into and has set in fields such as education, media, culture, and has become a dominant force in means of communication in universities and schools. Ideology has invaded our homes and has engaged in an offensive against the mother cell, the seminal cell in any healthy society, i.e. the family itself. They even try to destroy the innocence of our children by going as far as perverting their most basic and elementary identity, i.e. biology itself. The politically correct has become a prevalent constant in public debate to expel rationality and replace it with manipulation, repeated commonplaces, and buzzwords. Ideology has invaded the human soul itself to expel God from it and the dignity with which He has endowed us. And with these methods, this ideology has always left behind it a trail of death, ignorance, and stark poverty wherever it passed through. I am myself living evidence of that. I was cowardly stabbed by a left-wing activist, and I only survived because of a miracle. operated by God. Once again, I thank God for my life. The United Nations organization can help overcome the current materialistic and ideological atmosphere that undermines some basic principles of human dignity. This organization was, after all, designed and established to promote peace among sovereign nations and social progress, with liberty in accordance with the preamble of the United Nations Charter. On matters such as climate, democracy, human rights, equality of rights and duties between men and women, and on so many other issues, all we need is precisely this: envisage and aim at the truth, in line with the Gospel of John 8:32, which reads as follows: "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." All of our national and international instruments should be ultimately geared towards achieving that objective. We are not here to erase nationalities and sovereignties in the name of an abstract global interest. This is not the Global Interest Organization. This is the United Nations organization, and it must remain as such. With a sense of humbleness and trust in the liberating power of truth, you can be sure that you will certainly be able to count on this new Brazil that I am presenting to you, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you all for the grace and the glory of God. Thank you very much.
That was the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. They're the first world leader to speak at this year's UN General Assembly, finishing up there with a spirited defence of nationalism. He said the United Nations is not about moving forward with globalist values, but it is an association of states. He also said that the Amazon rainforests do not belong to the world. They are not the lungs of the world. They are sovereign territory belonging to Brazil. And he called the attacks on his government sensationalist and colonialist, those attacks on his government over the handling of the fires in the Amazon rainforest. We're just now waiting for the US President Donald Trump to take the podium. He will be the second leader speaking this year. Douglas Herbert is here with me in the studio, and Bolsonaro, he actually singled out France and Germany there, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, about the amount of land they use for their agriculture. Look, it's perhaps not by coincidence that Bolsonaro is called the mini Trump, because his speech in so many ways was a refrain echoing all the things we hear from Trump, this staunch defense of sovereignty, this Brazil first agenda, and slamming outsiders who dare to in any way, shape, or form try to take Brazil to task, especially over the Amazon, saying, as you said, it's not the heritage of humanity. It's a fallacy to say that it's a Brazilian heritage. They're not the lungs of the world. So basically defending his own policies and saying that basically outsiders who criticize him are using the Amazon and indigenous people in order to undermine Brazilian sovereignty.
And let's go back to the UN. The real Donald Trump has just taken the podium. Let's take a listen.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ambassadors, and world leaders, 7 decades of history have passed through this hall in all of their richness and drama. Where I stand, the world has heard from presidents and premiers at the height of the Cold War. We have seen the foundation of nations. We have seen the ringleaders of revolution. We have beheld saints who inspired us with hope, rebels who stirred us with passion, and heroes who emboldened us with courage, all here to share plans, proposals, visions, and ideas on the world's biggest stage. Like those who met us before, our time is one of great contests, high stakes, and clear choices. The essential divide that runs all around the world and throughout history is once again thrown into stark relief. It is the divide between those whose thirst for control deludes them into thinking they are destined to rule over others, and those people and nations who want only to rule themselves. I have the immense privilege of addressing you today as the elected leader of a nation that prizes liberty, independence, and self-government above all. The United States, after having spent over $2.5 trillion since my election to completely rebuild our great military, is also by far the world's most powerful nation. Hopefully, it will never have to use this power. Americans know that in a world where others seek conquest and domination, our nation must be strong in wealth, in might, and in spirit. That is why the United States vigorously defends the traditions and customs that have made us who we are. Like my beloved country, each nation represented in this hall has a cherished history, culture, and heritage that is worth defending and celebrating, and which gives us our singular potential and strength. The free world must embrace its national foundations. It must not attempt to erase them or replace them. Looking around and all over this large, magnificent planet, the truth is plain to see. If you want freedom, take pride in your country. If you want democracy, hold on to your sovereignty. And if you want peace, love your nation. Wise leaders always put the good of their own people and their own country first. The future does not belong to globalists. The future belongs to patriots. The future belongs to sovereign and independent nations who protect their citizens, respect their neighbors, and honor the differences that make each country special and unique. It is why we in the United States have embarked on an exciting program of national renewal. In everything we do, we are focused on empowering the dreams and aspirations of our citizens. Thanks to our pro-growth economic policies, our domestic unemployment rate reached its lowest level in over half a century. Fueled by massive tax cuts and regulations cuts, jobs are being produced at a historic rate. 6 million Americans have been added to the employment rolls in under 3 years. Last month, African American, Hispanic American, and Asian American unemployment reached their lowest rates ever recorded. We are marshaling our nation's vast energy abundance, and the United States is now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world. Wages are rising, incomes are soaring, and 2.5 million Americans have been lifted out of poverty in less than 3 years. As we rebuild the unrivaled might of the American military, we are also revitalizing our alliances by making it very clear that all of our partners are expected to pay their fair share of the tremendous defense burden which the United States has borne in the past. At the center of our vision for national renewal is an ambitious campaign to reform international trade. For decades, the international trading system has been easily exploited by nations acting in very bad faith. As jobs were outsourced, a small handful grew wealthy at the expense of the middle class. In America, the result was 4.2 million lost manufacturing jobs and $15 trillion in trade deficits over the last quarter century. The United States is now taking that decisive action to end this grave economic injustice. Our goal is simple. We want balanced trade that is both fair and reciprocal. We have worked closely with our partners in Mexico and Canada to replace NAFTA with the brand new and hopefully bipartisan U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. Tomorrow, I will join Prime Minister Abe of Japan to continue our progress in finalizing a terrific new trade deal. As the United Kingdom makes preparations to exit the European Union, I have made clear that we stand ready to complete an exceptional new trade agreement with the UK that will bring tremendous benefits to both of our countries. We are working closely with Prime Minister Boris Johnson on a magnificent new trade deal. The most important difference in America's new approach on trade concerns our relationship with China. In 2001, China was admitted to the World Trade Organization. Our leaders then argued that this decision would compel China to liberalize its economy and strengthen protections to provide things that were unacceptable to us, and for private property, and for the rule of law. 2 decades later, this theory has been tested and proven completely wrong. Not only has China declined to adopt promised reforms, it has embraced an economic model dependent on massive market barriers, heavy state subsidies, currency manipulation, product dumping, forced technology transfers, and the theft of intellectual property, and also trade secrets on a grand scale. As just one example, I recently met the CEO of a terrific American company, Micron Technology, at the White House. Micron produces memory chips used in countless electronics. To advance the Chinese government's 5-year economic plan, a company owned by the Chinese state allegedly stole Micron's designs, valued at up to $8.7 billion. Soon, the Chinese company obtains patents for nearly an identical product, and Micron was banned from selling its own goods in China. But we are seeking justice. The United States lost 60,000 factories after China entered the WTO. This is happening to other countries all over the globe. The World Trade Organization needs drastic change. The second largest economy in the world should not be permitted to declare itself a developing country in order to game the system at others' expense. For years, these abuses were tolerated, ignored, or even encouraged. Globalism exerted a religious pull over past leaders, causing them to ignore their own national interests. But as far as America is concerned, those days are over. To confront these unfair practices, I placed massive tariffs on more than $500 billion worth of Chinese-made goods. Already, as a result of these tariffs, supply chains are relocating back to America and to other nations, and billions of dollars are being paid to our Treasury. The American people are absolutely committed to restoring balance to our relationship with China. Hopefully, we can reach an agreement that would be beneficial for both countries. But as I have made very clear, I will not accept a bad deal for the American people. As we endeavor to stabilize our relationship, we're also carefully monitoring the situation in Hong Kong. The world fully expects that the Chinese government will honor its binding treaty made with the British and registered with the United Nations, in which China commits to protect Hong Kong's freedom, legal system, and democratic ways of life. How China chooses to handle the situation will say a great deal about its role in the world in the future. We are all counting on President Xi as a great leader. The United States does not seek conflict with any other nation. We desire peace, cooperation, and mutual gain with all. But I will never fail to defend America's interests. One of the greatest security threats facing peace-loving nations today is the repressive regime in Iran. The regime's record of death and destruction is well known to us all. Not only is Iran the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism, but Iran's leaders are fueling the tragic wars in both Syria and Yemen. At the same time, the regime is squandering the nation's wealth and future in a fanatical quest for nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them. We must never allow this to happen. To stop Iran's path to nuclear weapons and missiles, I withdrew the United States from the terrible Iran nuclear deal, which has very little time remaining, did not allow inspection of important sites, and did not cover ballistic missiles. Following our withdrawal, we have implemented severe economic sanctions on the country. Hoping to free itself from sanctions, the regime has escalated its violent and unprovoked aggression. In response to Iran's recent attack on Saudi Arabian oil facilities, we just imposed the highest level of sanctions on Iran's central bank and sovereign wealth fund. All nations have a duty to act. No responsible government should subsidize Iran's bloodlust. As long as Iran's menacing behavior continues, sanctions will not be lifted. They will be tightened. Iran's leaders will have turned a proud nation into just another cautionary tale of what happens when a ruling class abandons its people and embarks on a crusade for personal power and riches. For 40 years, the world has listened to Iran's rulers as they lash out at everyone else for the problems they alone have created. They conduct ritual chants of death to America and traffic in monstrous anti-Semitism. Last year, the country's supreme leader stated Israel is a malignant, cancerous tumor that has to be removed and eradicated. It is possible, and it will happen. America will never tolerate such anti-Semitic hate. Fanatics have long used hatred of Israel to distract from their own failures. Thankfully, there is a growing recognition in the wider Middle East that the countries of the region share common interests in battling extremism and unleashing economic opportunity. That is why it is so important to have full, normalized relations between Israel and its neighbors. Only a relationship built on common interests, mutual respect, and religious tolerance can forge a better future. Iran citizens deserve a government that cares about reducing poverty, ending corruption, and increasing jobs, not stealing their money to fund and massacre abroad and at home. After 4 decades of failure, it is time for Iran's leaders to step forward and to stop threatening other countries and focus on building up their own country. It is time for Iran's leaders to finally put the Iranian people first. America is ready to embrace friendship with all who genuinely seek peace and respect. Many of America's closest friends today were once our greatest foes. The United States has never believed in permanent enemies. We want partners, not adversaries. America knows that while anyone can make war, only the most courageous can choose peace. For this same reason, we have pursued bold diplomacy on the Korean Peninsula. I have told Kim Jong-un what I truly believe, that like Iran, his country is full of tremendous untapped potential, but that to realize that promise, North Korea must denuclearize. Around the world, our message is clear. America's goal is lasting. America's goal is harmony. And America's goal is not to go with these endless wars, wars that never end. With that goal in mind, my administration is also pursuing the hope of a brighter future in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, the Taliban has chosen to continue their savage attacks. We will continue to work with our coalition of Afghan partners to stamp out terrorism, and we will never stop working to make peace a reality. Here in the Western Hemisphere, we are joining with our partners to ensure stability and opportunity all across the region. In that mission, one of our most critical challenges is illegal immigration, which undermines prosperity, rips apart societies, and empowers ruthless criminal cartels. Mass illegal migration is unfair, unsafe, and unsustainable for everyone involved. The sending countries and the depleted countries, and they become depleted very fast, but their youth is not taken care of, and human capital goes to waste. The receiving countries are overburdened with more migrants than they can responsibly accept, and the migrants themselves are exploited, assaulted, and abused by vicious coyotes. Nearly 1/3 of women who make the journey north to our border are sexually assaulted along the way. Yet here in the United States and around the world, there is a growing cottage industry of radical activists and non-governmental organizations that promote human smuggling. These groups encourage illegal migration and demand erasure of national borders. Today, I have a message for those open border activists who cloak themselves in the rhetoric of social justice. Your policies are not just. Your policies are cruel and evil. You are empowering criminal organizations that prey on innocent men, women, and children. You put your own false sense of virtue before the lives, well-being, and countless innocent people. When you undermine border security, you are undermining human rights and human dignity. Many of the countries here today are coping with the challenges of uncontrolled migration. Each of you has the absolute right to protect your borders. and so, of course, does our country. Today, we must resolve to work together to end human smuggling, end human trafficking, and put these criminal networks out of business for good. To our country, I can tell you sincerely, we are working closely with our friends in the region, including Mexico, Canada, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Panama, to uphold the integrity of borders and ensure safety and prosperity for our people. I would like to thank President Lopez Obrador of Mexico for the great cooperation we are receiving and for right now putting 27,000 troops on our southern border. Mexico is showing us great respect, and I respect them in return. The U.S., we have taken very unprecedented action to stop the flow of illegal immigration. To anyone conducting crossings of our border illegally, please hear these words. Do not pay the smugglers. Do not pay the coyotes. Do not put yourself in danger. Do not put your children in danger, because if you make it here, you will not be allowed in. You will be promptly returned home. You will not be released into our country. As long as I am President of the United States, we will enforce our laws and protect our borders. For all of the countries of the Western Hemisphere, our goal is to help people invest in the bright futures of their own nation. Our region is full of such incredible promise, dreams waiting to be built, and national destinies for all. And they are waiting also to be pursued. Throughout the hemisphere, there are millions of hardworking, patriotic young people eager to build, innovate, and achieve. But these nations cannot reach their potential if a generation of youth abandon their homes in search of a life elsewhere. We want every nation in our region to flourish and its people to thrive in freedom and peace. In that mission, we are also committed to supporting those people in the Western Hemisphere who live under brutal oppression, such as those in Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. According to a recent report from the UN Human Rights Council, women in Venezuela stand in line for 10 hours a day waiting for food. Over 15,000 people have been detained as political prisoners. Modern-day death squads are carrying out thousands of extrajudicial killings. The dictator Maduro is a Cuban puppet protected by Cuban bodyguards, hiding from his own people, while Cuba plunders Venezuela's oil wealth to sustain its own corrupt communist rule. Since I last spoke in this hall, the United States and our partners have built a historic coalition of 55 countries that recognize the legitimate government of Venezuela. To the Venezuelans trapped in this nightmare, please know that all of America is united behind you. The United States has vast quantities of humanitarian aid ready and waiting to be delivered. We're watching the Venezuela situation very closely. We await the day when democracy will be restored, when Venezuela will be free, and when liberty will prevail throughout this hemisphere. One of the most serious challenges our countries face is the specter of socialism. It's the wrecker of nations and destroyer of societies. Events in Venezuela remind us all that socialism and communism are not about justice. They are not about equality. They are not about lifting up the poor. and they are certainly not about good of the nation. Socialism and communism are about one thing only: power for the ruling class. Today, I repeat a message for the world that I have delivered at home. America will never be a socialist country. In the last century, socialism and communism killed 100 million people. Sadly, as we see in Venezuela, the death toll continues in this country. These totalitarian ideologies, combined with modern technology, have the power to excise new and disturbing forms of suppression and domination. For this reason, the United States is taking steps to better screen foreign technology and investments and to protect our data and our security. We urge every nation present to do the same. Freedom and democracy must be constantly guarded and protected, both abroad and from within. We must always be skeptical of those who want conformity and control. Even in free nations, we see alarming signs and new challenges to liberty. A small number of social media platforms are acquiring immense power over what we can see and over what we are allowed to say. A permanent political class is openly disdainful, dismissive, and defiant of the will of the people. A faceless bureaucracy operates in secret and weakens democratic rule. Media and academic institutions push flat-out assaults on our histories, traditions, and values. In the United States, my administration has made clear to social media companies that we will uphold the right of free speech. A free society cannot allow social media giants to silence the voices of the people, and a free people must never, ever be enlisted in the cause of silencing, coercing, canceling, or blacklisting their own neighbors. As we defend American values, we affirm the right of all people to live in dignity. For this reason, my administration is working with other nations to stop criminalizing of homosexuality, and we stand in solidarity with LGBTQ people who live in countries that punish, jail, or execute individuals based upon sexual orientation. We are also championing the role of women in our societies. Nations that empower women are much wealthier, safer, and much more politically stable. It is therefore vital not only to a nation's prosperity, but also is vital to its national security to pursue women's economic development. Guided by these principles, my administration launched the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiatives. The WGDP is the first ever government-wide approach to women's economic empowerment, working to ensure that women all over the planet have the legal right to own and inherit property, work in the same industries as men, travel freely, and access credit and institutions. Yesterday, I was also pleased to host leaders for a discussion about an ironclad American commitment protecting religious leaders and also protecting religious freedom. This fundamental right is under growing threat around the world. Hard to believe, but 80% of the world's population lives in countries where religious liberty is in significant danger or even completely outlawed. Americans will never fire or tire in our effort to defend and promote freedom of worship and religion. We want and support religious liberty for all. Americans will also never tire of defending innocent life. We are aware that many United Nations projects have attempted to assert a global right to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand, right up until the moment of delivery. Global bureaucrats have absolutely no business attacking the sovereignty of nations that wish to protect innocent life. Like many nations here today, we in America believe that every child, born and unborn, is a sacred gift from God. There is no circumstance under which the United States will allow international entries to trample on the rights of our citizens, including the right to self-defense. That is why this year I announced that we will never ratify the UN Arms Trade Treaty, which would threaten the liberties of law-abiding American citizens. The United States will always uphold our constitutional right to keep and bear arms. We will always uphold our Second Amendment. The core rights and values America defends today were inscribed in America's founding documents. Our nation's founders understood that there will always be those who believe they are entitled to wield power and control over others. Tyranny advances under many names and many theories, but it always comes down to the desire for domination. It protects not the interests of many, but the privilege of few. Our founders gave us a system designed to restrain this dangerous impulse. They chose to entrust American power to those most invested in the fate of our nation, a proud and fiercely independent people. The true good of a nation can only be pursued by those who love it, by citizens who are rooted in its history, who are nourished by its culture, committed to its values, attached to its people, and who know that its future is theirs to build or theirs to lose. Patriots see a nation and its destiny in ways no one else can. Liberty is only preserved, sovereignty is only secured, democracy is only sustained, greatness is only realized by the will and devotion of patriots. In their spirit is found the strength to resist oppression, the inspiration to forge legacy, the goodwill to seek friendship, and the bravery to reach for peace. Love of our nations makes the world better for all nations. So to all the leaders here today, join us in the most fulfilling mission a person could have, the most profound contribution anyone can make. Lift up your nations, cherish your culture, honor your histories, treasure your citizens, make your country strong and prosperous and righteous, honor the dignity of your people, and nothing will be outside of your reach. When our nations are greater, the future will be brighter, our people will be happier, and our partnerships will be stronger. With God's help, together we will cast off the enemies of liberty and overcome the oppressors of dignity. We will set new standards of living and reach new heights of human achievement. We will rediscover old truths, unravel old mysteries, and make thrilling new breakthroughs. And we will find more beautiful friendship and more harmony among nations than ever before. My fellow leaders, the path to peace and progress and freedom and justice and a better world for all humanity begins at home. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the nations of the world. And God bless America. Thank you very much.
The round of applause there for the US President Donald Trump, who's just wrapped up what was his third address to the UN General Assembly there in New York. And I guess the top line from that was that the future belongs to patriots, not globalists. There was a strong nationalist theme throughout that speech. He boasted of his reported economic success in what sounded very much like a campaign speech. He attacked China's trade practices, but he certainly saved his harshest words for Iran, citing what he called the regime's bloodlust and warning the country it will end up being just another cautionary tale of what happens when regimes abandon their people for their own personal gain. A strong defence of Israel as well. Well, Douglas Herbert was watching all of that. He joins me in the studio. Doug, what are your top takeaways from that rather long and somewhat, at the end, low-energy speech from Donald Trump?
Low energy. You can always tell when Donald Trump is reading from the prompter when he sticks to script, as opposed to ad-libbing, as we're used to seeing more at those raucous, the boisterous rallies where he's off script, sometimes entirely. Here, he seemed almost squinty-eyed at times, as he peered into that prompter, and I couldn't really identify any moment where he noticeably went off script. That said, it was not exactly an uplifting speech. It was a speech, if you were looking for, sources of uplift or enthusiasm or even optimism, it was rather dispiriting, and it was a speech filled with a world of threats, a world of enemies, real and perceived, and a speech which, like his previous two addresses to the General Assembly, may not have been as overtly confrontational. We didn't hear the Rocket Man rhetoric of a few years back, but at the same time a speech which was very much in that isolationist mold that has been this president's signature, very much in the America First mold. And the enemy is literally almost a list you could tick off. You said that his overarching theme, obviously, being the future doesn't belong to globalists, it belongs to patriots. He said, if you want your democracy, hold on to your sovereignty. That was a theme that was very much echoing the man who opened this UN General Assembly and the leader we heard just before Trump took the podium, Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil, who also hammered away at this sovereignty theme, lashing out at outsiders who dared to criticize his handling of the Amazon, basically saying that rainforest is not the heritage of humankind. They're not the lungs of the planet. That's all sensationalism. It's all a fallacy foisted on Brazil by outsiders who are seeking to undermine Brazilian sovereignty. Likewise with Trump, and he said this message before, he encourages leaders to look to their own corner first, look to your own countries first, which is why the arch irony of Trump being at the UN podium is it's an institution whose various values his own are antithetical to, a UN that he is constantly bashing, an institution that he almost openly despises and is heavily criticized. Yet he is a showman, he enjoys the podium, and he brings this message time and again. On China, though, he showed no sign of backing down on those tariffs.
That's when he sounded most animated, I would say, during that speech.
Most animated. He accused China basically of gaming the system and of stealing intellectual property. That is the basis on which it has built its economic model. Now, obviously, economists will say that there is a grain of truth of that. The problem is others will say it's taken widely out of context, and Donald Trump has essentially given himself credit for the tariffs already having successes, saying jobs are coming back, relocating back to America as a result of his tariffs. Many economists say just the opposite is happening, that the trade war with China has really sent a frisson, a shiver down the spine of the global community, and is really undermining a lot of economies and also hitting American consumers really hard. On Iran, once again, he said if Iran continues its menacing behavior, as he called it, the sanctions will not only not be lifted, they will be tightened. That rhetoric just as hardline as ever, defending his immigration policies, touting a rebuilt military, a military in which he's poured $1 trillion into renewing, reinvigorating, rebuilding, and yet at the same time, this is a president who, being isolationist, doesn't want to get America involved in any more wars. So he saying he hopes he never has to use that military, but really beginning the speech on that strong America First note and touting America as the world's most powerful nation and touting its military.
Because this was a big opportunity for Donald Donald Trump, wasn't it? And one that his political rivals don't have. It's that he has the world's ears just ahead of an election year, just as we get into the political campaign. He gets to tout all of his economic achievements. He gets to talk about his foreign policy as well. I mean, he gets the world's attention for
it's
for
free campaign time at the world's perhaps most international, most prestigious podium, a UN General Assembly. He literally has the eyes of the world riveted on him for however long that speech was, about half an hour or so.
45 minutes.
And you did hear the campaign themes intervening and insinuating themselves into this speech. Not just insinuating, they were woven tightly into the speech with the railing against socialism and communism, lumping the two together, socialism, communism. Once again, a theme that we also heard in the Brazilian president's speech, where he railed against Cuban agents in Venezuela, and he talked about his country, Brazil, still recovering from socialism, presumably socialism imposed by his predecessors in office. Donald Trump very much also tagging, stigmatizing these two systems, tying socialism to communism, and it's perhaps no coincidence that one of the Democratic candidates for president, one of the frontrunners among those, that Democratic field, Bernie Sanders, an independent from Vermont, touts what he calls a democratic socialism, his brand of democratic socialism, a staunch defender of that. So he's trying to, Trump, inject sort of rhetorical poison into the very use of socialism, already a word that resonates very, very strongly with a lot of Americans, for good or for bad. He's in full campaign mode here. It's a laundry list of all of the topics we've known for more. Nothing, we've heard from him before, nothing new under the sun in this speech. Perhaps a more subdued Donald Trump, but the themes that he was articulating here are very much signature.
He certainly stuck to the script this time, didn't
Absolutely.
He hasn't done that in the past. And as you say, no nicknames this time around. All right, Doug, thank you very much indeed, as always, for your analysis. We're going to take a short break. Do stay with us. This is France 24.
France 24, 4 news channels in 4 languages, 430 journalists, 35 nationalities, 160 bureaus around the world, a global reach. 385 million households in over 180 countries can watch France 24. 80 million viewers watch the channel every week, and the numbers are constantly growing, with audience multiplied by 2 in 5 years. France 24 Online is also forging ahead. Over 15.5 million visits a month on France24.com. With 59.8 million videos viewed online, France 24 is a leader on YouTube, while our 38.2 million Facebook and Twitter followers make us France's #1 channel on social media. To our constantly growing community of viewers, thank you.